Edge is the consensus top need for the Washington Commanders nearing the end of March, but that doesn't mean it's edge or bust at the NFL draft. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you Monday through Friday, your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, also contributing to WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team as well. And I want to thank you for coming through for today's episode of Locked On Commanders, in which we're going to talk about 2025 early breakout commander predictions from various members of the Washington Commanders beat. We went ahead and polled some of the members, and we got some interesting answers back from them. We're talking about attacking the offensive line in the NFL draft, but we're going to start it all off with, just because the fact of the matter is that the edge is the highest position of need entering the month of April here at the end of the month of March, doesn't necessarily mean the Commanders have to go there in the first round of April's NFL draft. Every day, or those of you who come through every single day, a special thank you to you for coming through every single day. Of course, if you're not an everydayer, if you are an everydayer, or if you're brand new to the show, I want you to go ahead and subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. And if you're new, thank you for finding the program. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Today, we're going to do a second mailbag episode. I wanted to get the mailbag as emptied out as possible before we enter next week, because next week we're going to hear from Dan Quinn. We're going to hear from Adam Peters. We might hear from Josh Harris. That's still kind of up in the air. And I'm sure once we hear from those gentlemen, there are going to be more new questions coming in. So I want to get as many of these questions put on tape, put on record for you guys so that we can get to those batch of new questions when they start coming in next week. And we're going to start this one off with Seth, who says, I know that recently people have been asking a lot about trading up and back, but I feel like we most likely stay put. Depending on who falls to 29, what would you rather have? A wide receiver like a Matthew Golden out of Texas, or Luther Burden out of Missouri, or an edge rusher like a Mike Green out of Marshall, or Jordan Birch out of Oregon? Edge is definitely more of a need, but if one of those receivers is somehow there, do you think we'd pass up on an edge to add that final piece to the receiver room? Very interesting question from Insider Seth there. Given Adam Peters' history and the fact that Dan Quinn singled out the defensive tackle position as the brightest spot in his introductory press conference, yet AP drafted Johnny Newton with his second pick in his first NFL draft, I think we know AP is not interested in need, but best players. That being said, if the need fits the best player, then absolutely you're going to see an edge rusher taken. But if there's a better player available at a different position than edge, Adam Peters will absolutely pull the trigger there. So the easy answer here is yes, there is a possibility that even though Adam Peters, and even though most of us, well, I won't say Adam Peters because he doesn't say that officially, but because most of us believe edge is the most important need, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go need or go edge in the first round. And I would say if the edge and the receiver in question at the top of the board are even, right, then I think you go edge. And really that can be said for any, safety, corner, offensive lineman, running back, right? Whoever, if it's edge or this guy, and they're basically even, I think that's where the need kind of comes into Trump. So need and best player do go hand in hand sometimes, but not all the time. So to answer the question specifically, I thought we'd rank our top 3 edge defenders who may reasonably be expected to be available at number 29, and the top 3 receivers who are reasonably expected to be available at number 29. And again, it's the end of March. We've got about a month until the actual NFL draft. So these types of things could shift as we get closer and closer to the draft. So we might reevaluate stuff like this as we get closer. So the top 3 edge rushers expected to potentially be available number 29, according to Mock Draft Database. If you don't know about Mock Draft Database is a lot of work. They collect all the mock drafts from your NFL.coms, your PFFs, your CBS Sports, all those guys. And they basically just collect all the data and tell you this player is going in this range. Here's your kind of consensus mock board. There's a consensus mock draft. Very good site. If you don't know about it, I highly suggest you check it out if you're a draft nerd like I am. And I would say probably like Seth is, because the question is very heavily draft based, obviously. So the top 3 edges, according to Mock Draft Database, that are in the range of being available at number 29 for the Washington Commanders. The top one, these rankings from Mock Draft Database. The top guy, Donovan Ezaraku out of Boston College, played 10 or more games in 4 college seasons, a tackle for loss and sack machine in his career, 30 career sacks, 47 career tackles for loss. Amazing production. Really good at shedding blockers, quick off the line, uses his long arms really well, has really good bend, very undersized for a defensive end. Came in just over 6'2", more likely to be an outside linebacker than he is a D-end. Even a wide 9 D-end is a little bit of a stretch. So that's kind of the story on Donovan Ezaraku. James Pearce Jr. is the second highest rated edge on the Mock Draft Database board. Coming out of Tennessee, played 13 games in each of the last 3 seasons, but only has 12 starts overall in his career. 10 sacks in 2023, 7.5 in 2024. So his sack production went down this last season, 19.5 total career sacks, 30 total tackles for losses overall. Good production. 2023 was his best season. True pass rusher, but again, less of a D-end. Outside linebacker, we'll talk more about James Pearce here in just a little bit. We need to play at least wide 9, if not standing up. There are off-field character concerns. Lack of recruitment to another bigger program after his 2023 standout season is a little bit concerning as well. You go out there and have a breakout season for Tennessee, you'd think that the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States of the world would come calling. Nobody really came calling. That part of his recruitment never really heated up. Just came back to Tennessee and did his thing. And then we have Michael Williams out of Georgia, 40 games played in 3 seasons with the Georgia Bulldogs. Solid marks as a run defender, as a pass rusher. Not great at either of them, but good at both of them, right? Considered a high upside player who needs more reps to fully grow into his game. Explosive player, exceptional length, like his versatility, or not his versatility, his physicality. The Georgia bloodline of front 7 players kind of speaks for itself. He's a really good player, definitely still kind of a project, which is okay if you look at Cleveland Ferrell and Dietrich Wise as guys who can kind of hold that mantle as he comes along. So those are your top 3 D-ends. For the Mike Green crowd, for one, his projection is coming off the board mid-teens right now. So he's not really expected to be within striking range of the Commanders anyway, but also his off-field past, a little bit worrisome. Worrisome enough for me. I don't know that Washington is willing to bring in a guy with some of the accusations he has in his history onto the team as a first-round draft pick. Could be wrong there, but just a little bit of grain there because I know there's some Mike Green guys out there. My top 3 edges, when I look at those 3 top guys and I stack and rack them as I think for Commanders fits, I think Michael Williams is number 1. I think Donovan Ezaraku is number 2. And James Pearce Jr. is number 3. Now, the top 3 wide receivers that are reasonably expected to be there at number 29, Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. Once considered one of the top receivers in this class behind Travis Hunter, started at Ohio State for 3 years, good athlete who did most of his work from the slots. He's got good size, good ball skills, but he does lack top shelf athleticism and explosiveness. Luther Burden III out of Missouri, 4.41 40-yard dash time, compared a lot to Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, who I know when there were rumors that he was going to be traded, a lot of Commanders fans wanted the Commanders to go after him. Started 10 games as a freshman and 33 overall in his career. Athletic playmaker, good speed and separation ability. Yak King that would fit in great with Cliff Kingsbury's scheme. Really well produced, very well despite playing for a less than prolific offense in Missouri. Had first round buzz earlier this offseason. That's kind of cooled off a little bit. So now he's like end of day 1, early day 2 type of guy. And then the third best receiver expected to be available at 29 is Jayden Higgins, Iowa State, a player that we did actually have in a mock draft earlier this offseason. Only 2 seasons at Iowa State, but both of them were very productive. Started his career at 2 years at Eastern Kentucky. DQ is going to like that he had to earn his way up to big-time college football and then produced at that level. Can play inside or outside, not super athletic, but his 6'4" frame, along with the athleticism he does have, pretty impressive combination. Matthew Golden of Texas, Ted McMillan out of Arizona, are both trending right now to go back end of the top 10, early teens. So both of those guys are kind of off the board at number 29 to be considered right now. My top 3 receivers from the list of available options, I've got Luther Burden the third 1. I've got Higgins number 2, and then I've got Emeka Egbuka third, primarily because I really think the Commanders want to give at least one more year to see what Luke McCaffrey can start to develop into. You already have Deebo Samuel, so I don't know that you need to go slot heavy with a guy like Egbuka. Noah Brown is back on the roster. Give those guys some time as well. So given those 6 players, those 3 edge rushers, those 3 receivers, here's my 6 players in the order that I would draft them in. If we're only looking at edge and wide receiver, corner, offensive line, safety, got it. Like those are all options. Running back if the right one falls. which I can tell you most likely it's not going to. But here in just looking at the edge and the receiver options, here's my list. 1, I go Mykel Williams. And Mykel Williams is available from this group of 6. That's who I'm taking. Because him and Luther Burden III are neck and neck for me. The upside for both guys is exceptional. The role that they could play, each of them as a rookie, is good enough for a back end of the first round pick for me. So they're neck and neck. So like I said, the tie goes to the biggest need, which is edge. So Mykel Williams out of Georgia is the guy. Wide receiver Luther Burden III obviously is the second guy. Jayden Higgins, wide receiver out of Iowa State would be third. Diamond Ezeraku, the edge out of Boston College, fourth. Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, fifth. James Pearce Jr. is at the bottom of my list there in Tennessee. And to be truthful, Pearce is not on my board. I know he's on some people's boards, but he's not on my board. Why? I'm going to tell you that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by GameTime. And GameTime wants you to imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, witnessing the unforgettable moments. Hail Mary, anybody. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets to that game should not be stressful, should not take away from that experience. Well, that is where GameTime can come in because it makes it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. GameTime Picks is one of my favorite parts of the GameTime app or the GameTime website. The curation feature makes it easier for you to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever it is you're looking for. And there's super deals, lowest price guarantees, where if you find the same tickets in the same section for less, GameTime will give you 110% of the difference between those tickets and the ones they've got listed. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing now in today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we just got done talking about the tipping point between drafting an edge, which is most likely considered to be the top need in this year's NFL draft as the roster stands today, or taking a jump at a guy at a position like wide receiver who may or may not be the biggest need, but could serve a bigger purpose, could be that best player available, as we like to put it, despite not being part of the biggest need. And of course, one of the players that we had to talk about in that edge grouping, James Pearce Jr. from the Tennessee Volunteers. And I'll tell you right now, James Pearce Jr., personally, not a guy that is on my board. I know there's at least some NFL executives out there who have kind of hinted at he may not be on their boards either. And Dr. Wonderful came through for this mailbag and said lots of people like defensive end James Pearce Jr., but I'm not sure he's the edge we need. He's long and lean, doesn't set the edge well. We need an edge who can pass rush and defend the run. Other DEs at this spot seem better. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I've got James Pearce Jr. off the board because some of those problems. He is lean. He measures up more like a Jeremy Chin than he does a defensive end. He's definitely a good pass rusher in his college career, but not much of a run stopper projection to the NFL. Without Chin's coverage ability, James Pearce Jr. basically is a situational pass rusher only. That's the projection on him from where I sit. And you don't spend a first-round pick on guys like that. If he needs to put on weight in the National Football League, I think most evaluators agree that no matter where he goes, no matter what scheme he plays in, he's going to have to put on more weight. And when you have a guy like that who wins with athleticism, who wins with speed, and they put on weight, there's no telling, honestly, what is going to happen to him with his ability and his athleticism. And if that weight counterbalances all that stuff, you take away what made him special in the first place, and now you just have somebody that you can't really work with that. Even then, he's really not all that athletic. He's a more athletic. He's just been more athletic than his competition in the NFL, right? There's this comment about a lot of guys like, you look really good when you're playing a guy who's going to be an accountant next year. You know what I mean? You're not playing against a guy who's going to be in the NFL. Now, Tennessee, he's playing plenty of top-level college talent, but even some of that top-level college talent, they're not going to make it in the National Football League. He's got tight hips, lacks bend, doesn't have all that much power, kind of going back to that lean frame again, right? He basically looks to me like a less talented Chase Young coming out at this point. Not a big repertoire of moves, wins with his pure athleticism more than anything else. And if guys like that don't learn how to win in more ways than one, they don't usually thrive in the NFL. Then he's got the added problem that Chase didn't have, which is he's got to change his body to make it in the NFL. Then there's his off-field stuff. Clearly, when I put a guy like Donovan Ezeraku, who projects to play a position this team only used for 600, a little over 600 snaps in 2024, the position that Dante Fowler Jr. played, is worth the first round pick over this guy. Clearly, I don't really see that fit, and I'm with Dr. Wonderful here. And I don't mean to be harsh, but this is just the bottom line truth. This is what I want to give you on Locked On Commanders. Love his production, and there are those who say that production always translates to the NFL, and that's why he'll still be on their board. He'll still be up there. He's probably still going to get drafted in the first round, and great. And I have no ill will towards James Pearce Jr., so wherever he goes, especially if it's Washington, I hope he succeeds, right? I hope I'm wrong. But that's just the way I see him right now. And I disagree with the always part, that production always translates to the NFL. I don't think it always translates to the NFL. This is a case where I just don't see the risk being worth the bet that Pearce can stay as small as he is and win consistently in the NFL, or he can get bigger but stay as athletic as he is, which he isn't all that athletic anyway. And then the off-field stuff, the personality issues, the conflict issues, that those aren't going to rear their ugly head either. I'd rather wait. If I'm the Washington Commanders till day 2, roll the dice on a guy like Ohio State's JT Tuimoloau or Oregon's Jordan Birch. But that's just me. Don't know if that's Adam Peters. Don't know if that's you. Maybe you see it differently. But that's how I see James Pearce Jr. Bill came through and says, with Sam Cosmi out until October, Laramie Tunsil rated as the 19th best left tackle. I'm assuming these are PFF rankings. Tyler Biotis as the 19th best center. Andrew Wiley is the 57th best offensive tackle or right tackle. I'm not sure which one. Brandon Coleman as number 63rd. Cosmi, 23rd, even though he's out. And Allegretti as 49th. Whether Cosmi's replacement is Brandon Coleman or Andrew Wiley, it appears that the rest of the offensive line is a weak link. If there's no quality depth players on the team, then any injury means big trouble, in my honest opinion. Any chance Adam Peters, opts for an offensive lineman in the draft's first 2 rounds. Yeah. There's always a chance. You know what I mean? Look, we talked about this during the offseason before. Every day, you're going to remember this conversation. Washington Commanders, one of the best teams when it came to not getting their quarterback sacked. However, one of the worst teams when it came to giving up pressures on their quarterback. What does that equal? That equals your quarterback saved your offensive line quite a bit during the last season. There's no secret there. So certainly you can see the need to go out there and get an upgrade. You upgrade the left tackle position with Laramie Tunsil, who, yes, came off of an offensive line that also gave up a lot of pressures. But you look at it, and again, you're kind of hoping that Laramie Tunsil, the 5-time Pro Bowler, not necessarily responsible for it as much as he was a part of a struggling unit, right? That, in theory, automatically upgrades your right tackle position because you have young Brandon Coleman moving over to the right side, presumably. Could be a guard, could be a tackle. We don't know for sure yet. But if he goes to tackle, compete with Andrew Wiley, either going to push Andrew Wiley up the board a little bit or Brandon's going to go out there and take that job. Andrew Wiley is my pick right now, very early on in the offseason, to be the right guard until Sam Cosmi comes back. However, there is a chance that more talent gets added to this offensive line. Certainly, we know that the Commanders have had, or will have, I should say, Oregon offensive tackle Josh Conerly Jr. in for a top 30 visit. Now, that doesn't necessarily make the team interested in him. That doesn't necessarily mean they're eyeballing an offensive tackle in the first round. And look, Adam Peters wouldn't be the first GM to have a kid in for a top 30 visit to try to throw another team off the scent and maybe get them to jump ahead of them, right? Like, we're not going to take Josh Conerly, but we want you to trade ahead of us with the Baltimore Ravens to go get him, because then you're taking a guy off the board that we're not going to take anyway. Ha, 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 joke's on you. Or we want you to come up and say, hey, we know you're interested in Josh, but we really want Josh, and we'll pay you for him, and we trade back with you and get that. So he wouldn't be the first GM to play that tactic either. I'm not saying that's what he's doing. I'm just saying the simple fact that he's in for a top 30 visit does not necessarily mean the Commanders are sold on him and saying, we really want to get this guy. Then you look at the second round tackle picture, like a guy like Minnesota's Ariante Ursary, left tackle in college. Many think he translates best to the right side of the offensive line in the NFL, would be able to come in and compete with Brandon Coleman and maybe Andrew Wiley very early on as well. As for interior offensive linemen, Tyler Booker out of Alabama is the guy that we've seen his stock kind of rise and fall. So he's kind of all over the place. I'd be surprised to see him at number 29, still waiting. So a guy like Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State University, probably more likely. He's got line versatility. We know the Commanders like that kind of versatility out there as well. On day 2, a guard prospect like Marcus Mbow, who played tackle, I should say, at Purdue, but is likely to move inside in the NFL. Also an intriguing possibility. So, and those aren't even all the names that are guys that are going to be available, right? So while I think most of us agree edge is number 1, if the right guys aren't there on the defensive line, but they are on the offensive line, just like they could be on receiver, corner, safety, absolutely wouldn't be surprised if Washington opted to go there. Wouldn't be surprised to see if they opted to go there twice, because they just say, look, These two dudes were better than combination two dudes that were there available in any other combination. And it's all about protecting Jayden Daniels. That's why they traded for Deebo Samuel. That's why they traded for Laramie Tunsil. Do I think it's going to happen? I wouldn't bet money on it. Is it possible? That's the question. Absolutely. It's possible. It's also possible that certain players are going to have breakout seasons in 2025. Which Commanders player does the Washington Commanders believe will have a breakout season in 2025? That coming up next in today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a mailbag episode. 2 weeks in a row, we've had 2 mailbag episodes each week. We just got a lot of questions coming in from Commanders fans, insiders here at the Locked On Commanders podcast. I want to get as many of them answered as we can before we go to Florida this weekend for next week's league meeting festivities. Get to sit down with Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, and the gang and get a whole lot of information and probably open up the door for a whole lot more questions. Michael wants to know what the Washington media consensus is on a specific player or players to have breakout or ball out seasons in 2025. So what I did, Michael, is I sent a text to all of my fellow beat reporters covering the Washington Commanders. You know them well, I think. John Keim of ESPN, Nikki Jabala and Sam Fortier of the Washington Post, JP Finley, NBC Sports 106.7 The Fan, Candy Waller, Bowie TV, et cetera, Mitch Tischler, everybody, right? Chick Hernandez, WSA 9. If you can think of them on the beat, I sent them a text message. I told them I'm going to keep their selections anonymous because I'm going to give them the opportunity to specify their choices on their shows, their platforms, their way. But I will deliver to you the results. I had a lot of votes here, well over a dozen. Johnny Newton and Ben Sinnott tied for first place. Defensive tackle Johnny Newton, Ben Sinnott, tight end, and a lot of opportunity was talked about, right? Obviously, the trade of Jonathan Allen definitely clears a path for Johnny Newton to get more reps and have more responsibility and really come into his second offseason, right? Like the first offseason for a rookie is a whirlwind anyway, but also Johnny was dealing with the surgery, dealing with his second surgery, dealing with the injury, just dealing with a lot, right? Missed a lot of time during that ramp-up period. So this time, hopefully, Johnny's healthy and stay healthy and get a full ramp-up, get a full training camp, all that stuff, and you see him take that next step. So Johnny Newton, I don't want to call him a low-hanging fruit option, right? But given what he was battling his rookie season just to get on the field, it's definitely a very logical choice. Ben Sinnott, again, opportunity is part of that. Zach Ertz is a year older. The addition of Laramie Tunsil, some said, should free up those tight ends to not have to stay in and block or chip block as much, which will help them become part of the passing game better. His development simply as a second-year player, again, he gets the entire offseason to kind of think about everything that happened, come in fresh for a new offseason. Plus, John Bates, more of a blocking tight end, we already know that. So, if Zach Ertz is going to get a little bit of trim in his workload, makes sense that Ben Sinnott probably gets a little bit of increase in his workload. Plus, we all want to see Ben Sinnott play more in Cliff Kingsbury, man. Like if you're looking for ways to innovate your offense compared to last year to keep defenses on their toes, using Ben Sinnott more certainly helped do that, right? Marshawn Lattimore got some love as well, as did safety Will Harris, cornerback Mikey Sanders still, tight end John Bates got some love as well, wide receiver Noah Brown. I also got some not so subtle, multiple reporters responded with some not so subtle second round running back comments as well. Can I pick the second round running back? Some picked a name. I'm not going to put out the names, but some said, can I pick the second round running back as the not so subtle breakout player in 2025 as well? Mine is tight end Ben Sinnott for all the reasons we just talked about. So good question there. Those are the results. Ken asked, any idea why teams seem to be avoiding wide receiver Elijah Moore? He seems like someone who's still young and should be given a shot. And I think with us losing our second best deep threat in De'Ami Brown, he makes perfect sense to bring in to compete. So Elijah Moore, second round pick in 2021 out of Ole Miss by the New York Jets. After 2 seasons, forced his way out of New York, was traded to the Cleveland Browns along with a third round pick for a second round pick back, was benched at one point by the Cleveland Browns for disciplinary issues. All around, just not thought of as a great teammate, good locker room presence, and has had multiple run-ins with his coaches. So my best assumption, analysis is that is probably the reason, because he's doing all that, forcing his way out of the team that drafted him, having issues with the team that traded for him, all while topping out at 61 catches, 640 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns as his individual season highs. in each category. Moore was expected to bring explosiveness to the Jets, and the Browns thought they were going to get explosiveness out of him as well. And of the 35 receivers drafted in 2021, Moore ranks 22nd in yards per catch over the span of his career. That average, which started at 12.5 yards per reception as a rookie, which isn't bad, has only dropped every single season he's played since. Last year, his yards per catch average dropped to 8.8 yards per reception in 2024. Bad attitude, declining production before you turn 25. That's a bad mix, man. And there are rumors in Cleveland that he wanted a big payday as well in free agency. So if he went out there asking for way too much to even open the negotiating, that's going to turn teams off as well. So look, for the Commanders, if his ego is in check and he's willing to take a prove-it deal, if the team misses out on, say, Matthew Golden or Luther Burden or another receiver, I'm not against them bringing him in to compete with, say, Michael Gallup at the bottom of the receiver group, perhaps even earn some more reps. But if Washington is smart and they do this, he's going to earn everything he gets early on, because you got to make sure he is not going to be a problem having to earn everything he's going to get, and you need to do it as fast as possible. So those are my thoughts on Elijah Moore. Finally, Tia asked, does Jayden Daniels get to give an opinion on who Adam Peters picks in the NFL draft? So the way I can put this to you is directly, no. Like, Adam Peters is not going to call up Jayden Daniels and say, hey, dude, we're probably going to take this guy, da-da-da. However, Adam Peters has said multiple times he does talk to his players, and his quarterback is one of his leaders. So you assume that Jayden Daniels is one of those players. He talks to you and says, look, like, how do you feel about this kind of guy? How do you feel about that kind of guy? Like, what do you think about this dude? All that kind of stuff. So, like, is Jayden's opinion counted in the building? Absolutely. Is Adam Peters going to ask Jayden, like, give me your top 5? I don't think it's necessarily going to go that far with the quarterback in this year's NFL draft. So that's going to wrap up another great mailbag. I appreciate all the insiders for coming through and sending in questions. Hopefully you all out there enjoyed hearing all of the conversation. We will have more mailbags, of course. So insiders, you can continue to send in your questions as you see fit. I will, of course, prompt you for them as well ahead of mailbag episodes, like I always do. In the meantime, well, we have another episode to wrap up this week before I head to Florida for the NFL League meetings next week. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me to do that. Become a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. The group of insiders continues to grow into the offseason. I love it. You guys are going to get even more during the season, but we're still having plenty of fun conversations with insiders during the offseason. So thank you to all of you who are signed up. Continue to sign up and continue to remain insiders through what I think has been a very fun offseason so far, to be quite honest with you. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft. Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez are going to get you ready for all the Locked On NFL Draft action. Find that on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this very episode of this podcast. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through every single day. For everyone out there, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, so I can see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.